Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes at BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for joining us. At BlueScope, we're quickly approaching the 100th anniversary of the Port Kembla Steelworks in Wollongong, Australia, and the 25th anniversary of BlueScope itself, following the separation of iron and steel making and further downstream processes from former parent company BHP. Capturing this combined local and global narrative is company historian Craig Nealon, who as of 2025 has worked with the company for 46 years, having started with Lysart at the Spring Hill Works in the field of metallurgy. As a part of his research, Craig has not only been consulting various texts, archives and recordings, but has also set out to interview notable figures in the industry where possible. In this episode, we're featuring one such conversation between Craig and former ironmaker Jerry Platt, who in 1996 was recognised for his work with the honour of lighting Port Kembla's then brand new No. 6 blast furnace for the first time. Yes, the very same blast furnace that is currently being relined. Although now long retired, Jerry maintains a keen interest in the industry and now jointly runs a very popular Facebook group titled Iron and Steel in Australia, which includes numerous historical accounts and images. Sitting down together for a conversation at BlueScope in Western Port, Victoria, near where Jerry now resides, he reflects with Craig on his own journey to the Port Kembla Steelworks and the various industrial, technological, social and intercultural changes that have occurred over the decades. Now, let's delve into Jerry's narrative.
Well, Jerry, thanks for your time. I'm really been looking forward to this morning, and it's an absolute pleasure to meet you this morning, and really interesting to find out a little bit about yourself and your career and your interest in iron making in particular. So on that note, just can you tell me a little bit about your early career and where this interest came from, and particularly the interest in history?
How did I become a metallurgist in the first place is where it starts, because when I was a kid, I went to boarding school in England and used to always go and stay with my grandfather for a week before school. And he'd always take us to the circus or a pantomime. And as we got older, teenager, he said one day, "It's getting harder and harder to entertain you blokes," me and my brother. "Would you like to see round the steelworks?" We lived on a farm. "Oh, yeah." And he knew one of the directors of the local steel company, so he organised a trip. So we went by train right in the middle of the works. The guide came and picked us up and took us around, and I was 16 or 17, and there's all this noise and sparks and molten metal running everywhere, and I thought, this is fantastic. And not a very logical way to choose a career, but I remember when I finished uni, went for a job interview, and one of the interviewers asked the same question. So I told him the same story. Well, I said, it's not a very good reason, but that's the reason. And they all burst out laughing, and the judgment was that was the best reason they'd been given all day, because all sorts of people had come in and given answers that they thought you would like to hear, and here was an honest answer. And the bloke said, "So really just an overgrown train driver?" Yeah, I suppose so. So they gave me a job, and I worked for a company called United Steel, which was the biggest steel company in England, and in a place up near the Lake District in the northwest of England. And it made iron and ferromanganese and steel and rails. And so I was there for a couple of years. I got married, and the steel industry in Britain was contracting. That was at its peak in those days. So I could see lots of people running around looking for fewer and fewer jobs. Where is there somewhere where there are fewer people looking for more and more jobs? And if you're a POM, then you either choose Canada or Australia, and I don't like snow, so I'm here. And sent off a letter. They said, in the Australia House brochure, if you're interested in a career in the steel industry, write to BHP in London. Did that. Was asked to come for an interview. I polished the shoes, got the only suit, and put that on. And after a couple of minutes, I thought something strange with this interview, because I'd gone down to sell me. That's what you do in interviews. And that wasn't what the interview was about. The interview was about selling Australia to me. I had the job if they could persuade me to go. So something a bit unusual. And got married, came out here, and went to Newcastle for 6 years in the blast furnaces. I was taken on as a cadet, so you went sort of a week in each of the departments for you to work out which one you'd like to work in, and for them to work out whether they like you or not. I said that was a bit of a nonsense, because I knew where I wanted to work. And 2 or 3 people said, you don't want to work there, they don't like graduates. They've only got one, and he's not much use. I won't mention any names.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Newcastle. So you went to Newcastle. What was Newcastle like at that time? What was anything special happening there?
No, that was in 1967. They just built number 4 blast furnace in 1963, and it was going quite well. They had a BOS furnaces. They were building a continuous casting plant.
Yeah, so that was a long time before Port Kembla had their BOS.
Yeah. Yes. They had. It was only a small caster, but it ran with another BOS, a 50-ton BOS furnace. It was going along pretty well. It didn't strike me. There were a few new Australians. They were mostly people who'd come in the first wave right after the war.
After the war, yes.
So there were a few, and I remember the superintendent coming round one day and having to talk to me, and asked if there's anything I'd like to say. And I said, yeah, well, I'm a bit worried that we were starting to get a few more second generation, if you like, new Australian people in there, and their English isn't any good, and that's makes it difficult to keep them working safely. And he said, no, that's not a problem. No, dismissed it out of hand, because there were a lot of retrenchments in the mining industry up the Hunter Valley at the time, and so all the ex-miners were coming down to the steelworks and getting jobs. So there were very few migrants. Then suddenly one day I got a message from the clerk saying that the general manager wanted to see me. It's a 20-minute walk from the blast furnace to the general manager's office, and I spent all that time wondering what I'd done wrong. And got in there, and he said he had a letter here from Brian Lowton saying, would I like to go and be the superintendent at number 1 plant at Port Kembla? And I obviously looked very relieved, and he said, why are you so relieved? And I said, well, I spent all the time walking over here wondering what I'd done wrong. And he said, Jerry, you'll learn. He said, general managers don't give people bad news. They get someone else to do that. I only give good news. So that was 1973. In those days, blast furnace campaign only lasted about 4 years, so there were a lot of relines, and so it was a very good learning experience there. Yeah.
So what did superintendent of number 1 works mean? Was that you in charge of the blast furnaces?
1, 2 and 3 blast furnaces, yeah. And so I came down in September 73. They all probably wondered who this pommy bastard was. It was that they didn't know very well, but the fellow I knew very well in Newcastle had given me quite a lot of advice, and he said that they're always trying to make a big name for themselves and break records and all this sort of thing, and they keep falling flat on their faces. He said, stop trying to do that, and you'll be so far ahead, it won't be funny. So
interesting.
Just concentrate on the basics of the operation.
So that was the time, though, the number 4 blast furnace was there at Port Kembla, right? And that was the one that was breaking records, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a bit earlier, but number 4 was working all right, but number 5 was just blown in.
Yes.
And that was nothing short of a disaster, that first campaign. So no one bothered about us much at number 1 plant, because everyone was watching what was happening at number 5. And stayed there for, must have been 4 years, and then moved over to number 2 plant, to number 4 and 5. we tried to nurse number 5 along to Reline in 1978. So that was quite a struggle, keeping it going. That was the early part of life. And then stayed at number 2 plant until 1982, I think. Then I moved up to head office, to the admin building, I should say, and worked for a fellow called Malcolm Burns, who was the manager of ironmaking at that time, working on various projects, and then got sent to set up what was a new thing that's called the supply department. So previously, the engineers did all their purchasing, the steel makers bought their raw materials, the iron makers bought theirs. There was a general store and general spares and things. It was very haphazard purchasing arrangement. So brought it all together into a supply department, which made quite a lot of changes in that area. That was a very interesting time. And it was probably around then that I became interested in history, because one of the jobs I got given was by a fellow called Jerry Ellis, who was the general manager at the time, was to try and clean the steelworks up. It was a pretty shabby place in those days. And so there were 3 of us. There was an engineer, an architect, a fellow called Ron Vaughan, and myself got given this job. So where the visitor centre is now at North Gate, that used to be a sort of camp of all sorts of contractors. All the buildings were whatever colour they'd originally been painted. The place just looked bad. So we hired an architectural consultant in from Sydney, and they knew nothing about steel industry, but they knew a lot about how you present buildings and things. And now our first idea was to sort of build a huge bund all around the works to hide it from everywhere. And they said, no, people driving down the freeway sort of look over there and say, wonder what's that? And if all they see is a great wall of dirt, they want to see behind it. So he said, just expose it, and by exposing it, you then have to keep it clean, because otherwise it looks very shabby. At that time, there was number 1 furnace blast furnace had long stopped. So we kind of knocked that down. And there's a bit of an outcry in certain parts of the community that it's a historical monument, and you can't knock it down, and no. And so it got involved with some of the historical people, and you could understand their point of view, but the reality was that the thing, very little of it was what was built in 1928, because it had all been replaced, and all the stairways were, they weren't standard design anymore, so you couldn't have the public in to go around it as a museum, because it would have been illegal, not to mention dangerous. So that's when I got involved, and there was a fellow there called Don Reynolds who was
Don. Yeah.
He was very interested in history. And then I was asked to help Jack Southern to write the book, because Jack had all the facts and figures, but they thought he was getting on a bit, so they thought he needed someone who spoke English better than him and to help write it.
So if I can interrupt for a moment, the book you're referring to is this wonderful book that I refer to it a lot myself now, and actually all the reading I've been doing, certainly like in the last year or so, is the book comes up as a reference in all sorts of documents. It's almost like the best reference that I know of that describes the early days of ironmaking in Australia. I'm not sure if that would be fair to say, Jerry, but maybe one of the only references, or it's a concise...
I've got a couple more to let you have a look at.
Yeah.
But, we were quite proud of it.
Yeah. It gets referred to a lot.
Yeah.
And it may be something that you might want to look in this, if a listener would look in the show notes, we'll have a link to it.
Yeah.
But, so that would have been a bit of an exercise. And looking through that book, I just wonder how you found this information, because there's some obscure places in remote parts of the country where little blast furnaces were built.
Well, we also got involved at the same time with some people from I think one was a historian and the other was a classic scholar from Sydney Uni. And they were doing a survey of the Lithgow blast furnace site. They knew nothing about iron making, so they wanted someone who did know something about it to come along and help. What's that? And do the interpretation. So we got involved with them. Some of the information came from them. One of the ones we'd never heard, neither Jack or I had ever heard of. They'd heard of because in universities they sort of hire an army of people to actually read the newspapers from the old days, and they see these newspaper references to this blast furnace that didn't last very long, but got mentioned in the papers. So, and that was in the days when nowadays you can go to Trove and search all the newspaper archives quite easily online, but in those days you had to go and get out the microfilms, and that's a very, very tedious thing to do. So Jack knew much more than I did, but I found one or two more things, and I knew he was a good deal older than me, so not as knowledgeable about new ways of finding information out, shall we say. So we put that together.
So Jack was a blast furnace man at Port Kembla?
He was. He started during the war, or before the war, and one of the things he did was during the war, there were a couple of BHP ships that were sunk bringing iron ore around from Whyalla. So the government said, righto, well, there are iron ore deposits all over New South Wales. How about you develop them? They even railed some iron ore from Whyalla to keep it off the ships. And there were altogether in the Second World War about 2 million tonnes of ore mined from various places in New South Wales, up at Carcoa, Cadia, and the other one that was near Crookwell was a lot mined from there. Yeah. So he was the leader of that exercise, and he sort of worked his way up the ranks and was the superintendent of 1, 2 and 3, and then went over when number 4 was built. He was a superintendent there when it broke its monthly record for the world. And then he went into a sort of more administrative job as he got older, because working in blast furnaces is not for old people.
Well, maybe this is a good time to ask this, and maybe it's a little unfair. There mightn't be a very good answer to it, but it sounds like you've been around just about every blast furnace in the country, spent a bit of even the old original ones, where the remains of them. Like, do you have a favourite blast furnace at all? Like, is there one that sticks in your mind as one that's worked particularly well? Or
number 6.
Okay, that's a good answer. And yeah, so number 6 is an interesting one, I guess. So you might want to explain your background with number 6 blast furnace.
Yeah, well, in 1991, Malcolm Burns went to run the collieries, and I got replaced him as manager ironmaking, or assistant general manager ironmaking. I forget the title. They kept changing. Anyway, so I was then running coke oven, cinder plant, and the blast furnaces. By that time, we were getting longer campaign lives. I said earlier we used to get in Newcastle about 4 years. By now, we were getting up to sort of 8 years out of a furnace. But we were constantly relining furnaces like number 2, which was relined in the early 80s, which is really a very small blast furnace by today's standards. And number 5 by this time was working very well. Few people conceived the idea that if we shut down 2 and 4 and built a new one, we'd save all the money on the relines, and it'd be much cheaper to operate because a large furnace, it's just more efficient, both process-wise and in terms of people running it. So we conceived this idea. We had a lot of support from John Prescott, who was I think at the start he might have been in charge of the steel division, but then he was the managing director, and he was always trying to get us to make it bigger and bigger. And we kept saying, no, we don't have enough raw materials to do that. So it took probably a couple of years from the idea forming to actually getting approval. And that was my first time I ever went and did a presentation to the board of the company, because I had to go down and explain it to them all. A bit like president's meeting, they don't make any decisions. They were all made beforehand, but you're never quite sure. And I went down with Paul Jeans and we did this presentation, and they all had a vote and put their hands up, and got a few tricky questions, but nothing we hadn't thought of. So I always remember walking out of there, and Paul said to me, "You must be feeling really pleased with that." And I said, "Well, yes and no. What do you mean? You got approval, didn't you understand?" I said, "Yeah, I understood that. That was the easy part. Now we've got to build a bloody thing."
Can I share my experience with when number 6 was announced? Because being a Lysart person, I was far removed from iron and steel making and still wouldn't understand it. But I can remember when it was there was a discussion about whether to build a new blast furnace, and I firmly remember there was a lot of talk in those days about mini mills. Everything was about mini mills, and in America they have a smaller electric arc furnace, and they just spit out steel. And I must admit, when it was announced that we were going ahead with number 6, I was quite surprised, because I thought we were going to build a mini mill, but instead. But
that was one of the questions, the tricky questions the board asked.
Yes.
But we knew that was an obvious question that we'd asked, and that there isn't enough scrap in Australia to produce that sort of 2.5 million, because by then the Sydney steel mill was underway. There was the one at Laverton, there was the one at Newcastle at Comsteel.
And of course, we had North Star in the US as well.
They're probably not sure when. I don't think that was part of BHP by then at that stage, was it?
Yeah.
Or maybe only 50%.
I can't recall. Yeah. I think we were it was a joint venture.
But several of the board asked the same question: why are you using this outdated technology when there's all these mini mills? And so you had to say, well, you'd have to import all the scrap. In those days, anyway, the mini mill wasn't capable of making the higher grades that are needed for some of the flat products. They were very good for rod and bar and that sort of product, but they weren't at that time very good at producing high-grade flat product steel. So, yeah.
But it's funny, we've had the same challenges and the same issues sort of right now about, whether to bring number 6 back to life, because there's a lot of arguments, and people in the community say, well, why don't you build an electric arc furnace? And so it's almost like the circle has stayed the same, and we have the same issues. But do you follow now number 6? Do you
I do.
See on the YouTube channel, we've had some updates there about what's happening with the reline. And
Yeah, so I get some other people telling me as well as you. So, I know a fellow who, get what his title was, but he was the general manager of Environment and Safety or something for BHP, a fellow called Dr. John Burgess, and he's retired, but he does a lot of work with universities studying green ideas. See him every few months, and so we, as a group, we sit there and have lunch and talk about all these schemes for hydrogen and Whyalla and Gladstone and all these other places, and it depends how much the government wants to subsidise the industry. Technically, that you can use hydrogen to reduce ore and feed it into an electric furnace and make steel. And nowadays, you can make any grade of steel you want that way, but not cost effectively.
It's the availability of hydrogen.
Yeah.
And we, as a company, we say the same sort of thing. It's a long way away.
It certainly wouldn't work in time for number 6.
Correct. That's why we need number 6 at the moment. Yeah. That's right. It's worth pointing out that you actually had the honour of lighting number 6 blast furnace.
I did.
Is that right? In order to bring it to life, right? So when it first started. Yeah. So what sort of event was that? Was that a big thing?
No.
Big occasion, like a lot of people?
No, wasn't. I've got a picture of it. But before number 5 blew in, I was working in Newcastle, and we had a certain piece of equipment on the furnace up there that they were installing at number 5, and they didn't understand it. It's never operated it, so they asked a couple of us to come down. We had a look, told them how to go about this and that, and I always remember sitting in this meeting where the whole topic of conversation was about lighting the furnace, because Lady McLennan, the wife of the chairman, was going to do the honours, and the debate was, do we have to have a stainless steel lance, or could we get a silver-plated mild steel lance, because it'd be much cheaper? And if you invite the chairman's wife to light the furnace, you can't change that. So if you've set a date, I mean, obviously you've consulted about what day you'll be ready, but having set the date, you then have to be ready on that time.
Okay.
And the furnace wasn't really ready, but they had to blow in, and it was, say, a disaster. So when number 6 was being built, we said, we've got to have some sort of ceremony to launch this thing, but we aren't going to repeat that mistake. So we'll have a dedication ceremony, and then we'll light it when it's ready.
I understand, yes.
And it was quite interesting. So it was George Edgar that talked to Prescott, and Prescott said, bloody glad to hear that. He said, I've been really worried about the fact that you'd repeat the mistake that was made back then. So we had a ceremony, and lots of people on the cast house floor, and Graham Roberts made a nice speech dedicating the furnace, and then they finished off, and it was finally ready at about 10:22 on certain date. So we lit it when they said, well, we're ready. So it was in the middle of the night. We said, George Edgar laughed at this. I said, we'll have no visitors, please, for the first month, because there'll be all sorts of teething problems, and there was a new work system being involved, new equipment, so we don't want any distractions. No visitors, he says. Does that include me? Yep, that includes you, George. Yeah. But how will we know what's going on? We said, every morning we will send an email. You tell me all the people who'd like to get this email, and we'll send an email out telling you what happened the previous night, and we'll have a graph of what we expect to achieve, and we'll steadily draw what actually happened. So this was done, and we had no visitors for a month.
It's funny you should say that, because in a way the control room there is actually designed for visitors, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's like a viewing area and a platform. It was quite a showpiece when it was
quite
open,
deliberate,
wasn't it?
and also to let visitors have a look without going into the control room.
Yes.
And distracting people. You get mildly distracted, but it's not as bad as if they're all tramping around over your feet. The other thing that was remarkable was that someone said, I've never seen anybody before put down on a piece of paper, this is what we're going to do for the next 2 months, in advance, tell you that, and then plot where they actually got to. People normally keep quiet about what they're going to do, because then people can't say, look, you haven't achieved what you said you'd achieve each day. So it didn't quite achieve what we expected, but very nearly. So it worked very well. And I remember in 2011, when it was shut down, they announced earlier on that it was going to close. And a lot of people said, why are you closing number 6 down instead of number 5? Because at least when I left, the cost of iron from number 6 was quite a bit cheaper than number 5, probably $10 in 160, something like that. So significantly cheaper, just because of how it was built. But if you take the emotion of attachment to number 6 out of it, and you say that number 5 had only just been relined,
yes,
and if we close it down, you've then got to write off all that, whereas number 6 is already written off, and number 6 would only run for another 5 years and then need relining again, whereas number 5 will run for 10 or 15 years. By then, 15 years was the normal.
Well, you must be very pleased to see that it's coming back to life.
Indeed, yes, yeah.
You know, we're hoping it's going to be bigger and better and all the latest gear.
Yeah.
So you keep in touch with the iron makers there at Port Kembla, and tell me about the Pig Iron Club, because that's something I don't know much about. But
nor should you.
Yeah, well,
nor should
exactly.
You.
That's right. It's a secret society.
Don't let everybody in. In England, there was a company part of the United Steel Companies was a place called Upperby Frottingham, which is still working, and they had 4 blast furnaces which were known as the 4 Queens. They were Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary, Queen Victoria, and Queen Anne. They were the sort of the gurus of ironmaking in the UK. And when number 4 was built, there was some connection between the companies, and when number 4 broke the monthly record for ironmaking in the world, these people said, well, we have a pig iron club, and it explained how it was. And so one was started out here. The criteria were that you had to have been involved in some way with a furnace that produced more than 3,000 tonnes a day for a calendar month. I mean, even number 2 furnaces made more than 3,000 tonnes a day now, but in those days that was a lot. So it was formed, and I can't remember when I was invited to join, but must have been mid-70s. All it does is hold a get-together once a year. It used to be all paid for by the company. When I was the president of it, we put a lot of pressure on costs, and we thought this didn't look good. So we started charging people, younger people, so only old people go for free.
I've got an interest. You said you were involved with the cleaning up of the steelworks and some of the, the demolishing of some of the old blast furnaces, but some pieces were left behind up at the visitors centre. So if you were to go and do a tour nowadays at Port Kembla, what would you see out there in the yard there at the visitors centre? Because there's a couple of ladles and the bell top.
And the bell, as part of the cleaning up and demolition. And a few of us interested in the history, we thought we should keep some things like that. So there was a small ladle, it's a 120-tonne ladle, which were the ones they started with at number 1 Platt in 1928. Slag ladle, I think there, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there used to be a locomotive steam engine there, but that's
and
found another home.
I did know where. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head where that went, but
from my work with the historians up in Lithgow, we got to know the fellow who ran the state mine railway system up there. So over the years, I started out only looking after coke ovens, blast furnaces, and centre Platt, and then with all the reorganisations that took place, I gradually acquired all the traffic department and yard department, energy services, the oxy plant, and then finally steel making. So you gradually got the bigger and bigger job, and the other one was even owned the laboratories in Newcastle and the refractory services people in Newcastle as well. It kept giving you new things to learn about, and from the connection with the traffic and the others, we donated a couple of old diesel locos that we weren't using anymore to the mine up there, and they used to run up there. And there were a couple of other people after me who donated a couple more, so I think there's probably 4 or 5 locos found good homes.
So this interest in history, I'm interested now in the Facebook page that I think you're the joint administrator for, but it's a very, very popular page. There's a lot of people who have joined it, and you get a lot of interaction. Any old photos or old stories, I think, gets a lot of traction, doesn't it? And has that been an interesting thing, or is it onerous, or how did you get into that?
One day you'll be the same age as me, Craig. People are always saying, what do you got planned for the weekend? And they say, nothing, actually. It's the same as the rest of the week, because time is different when you're older and you don't go to work. So at these monthly lunches that we hold, we got discussing the apparent lack of interest of Port Kembla in writing a book. That was universally condemned as the wrong way to go. But then we are all 70s or 80s. So. And so we thought, well, we'll do it ourselves then. And so that was where the idea came from. And I'd written bits. I'd sort of laid out a book. In these days, using Trove, you can get an awful lot from the newspapers. I have a very low opinion of journalists generally, because I hope none of you are thinking of moving in that direction, because whenever you read something in the papers or TV about a subject you understand, it's riddled with holes. And therefore I have to assume that when I'm reading about something that I don't know about, I have to assume that that's equally riddled with holes as well. So I'd done all the old blast furnaces in Australia as a chapter on each one. So just had to sort of polish them up, find a few more pictures, because nowadays there are a lot more pictures around on the internet than there used to be. And then I thought, we can't just deal with iron making, we'll have to move into steel making, which is something I understand less about. And then was some interesting stories, surprisingly, all here in Melbourne. But there was a couple of steel-making shops in Melbourne that no one had heard of. And again, you just get them from the old copies of the Argus and then get into rolling mills, which I really don't understand, and I had a lot of help from a fellow called Wayne Hogan. I don't know if you know Wayne.
Yep.
And his father was the senior foreman or whatever in the hot strip mill when it started up.
So he was the last employee, the original Lithgow people.
Yeah.
Was the last one of them.
Yeah. So Wayne had and he used to work in the coke ovens and the sun in various places. So he helped with a few. But yeah, these days it's relatively easy to find out the history of the place, even though you knew nothing about it. Then I got that book from Western Port, which was interesting because there were some things a lot of things I didn't know about, but I was surprised about how much I'd been able to find out without having been, because I've never been involved. My closest involvement with Western Port is that lady who cuts my hair's husband works on the paint line here.
Okay, so this explains a lot, actually, because I've been wondering the amount of detail that you've posted on this Facebook page. It's very detailed and a lot of information. It's fantastic, really. Yeah.
Occasionally you get like the tin mill book that you lent me and the Western Port book, you get a lot of facts from them, but you can get quite a lot of them from other sources as well when you know where to look. And I mean, in 1935, it was the 50th anniversary of BHP. And so they produced a book on that. And,
I know it well. Lovely book.
Yeah, and it's got all sorts of technical details. It's not so strong on the people side of things.
Yes. And
in the Facebook group, we weren't trying to deal with people. We were trying to deal with the process more than the people.
Well, it's been a success. It's a fabulous success. And I noticed there's a lot of posts come out there's a group in Newcastle that do a similar sort of thing. And they're posting 2 or 3 times every day old photos from Newcastle. So, Jerry, you're conscious that 100 years is coming up for Port Kembla.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean anything to you personally? You've been there so long yourself, or?
No, not really, but tens of thousands of people have been there. When I came from Newcastle, the real change I noticed was the number of new migrants that were in the place.
Okay.
Incredible.
So that was very different to Newcastle.
Newcastle, as I said earlier, had a few, but they were the sort of immediate post-war ones. In those days, you tended to have a different nationality on each shift. There are certain tensions within the broader Yugoslav community, for example. Number 4 furnace, I remember we had a shift that was all Turkish and another shift that was all Portuguese and another one that was all Macedonian. And I remember ringing up employment office one day and said, we need 5 new people. We want 3 Turks, 1 Yugoslav and a Portuguese, please. And they just said, yes, righto. And 3 Turks, 1 Yugoslav and a Portuguese duly turned up. I just can't imagine you being allowed to do that.
It seems very hard to sort of understand that, but it worked, I guess.
It worked very well.
And one reason I can vividly remember, like a communication would come out and it would be in 5 or 6 different languages because people just couldn't read in English, a lot of people.
Yeah.
It seems quite amazing now.
And another occasion, a group of people from the slab yard was taken out on a trip to the old pipe mill out at Kembla Grange. And I asked the superintendent, he told me this was going on, and I said, I've never been. Could I come with you? Yeah. So we all climb in the bus and off we go. And it was the whole crew, the shift crew was there. And they were being shown what the customer did with the slabs when they were sold. So we have a look around the place, and we're walking out of the door through the side of the building, and there's a great long crocodile, and I'm second last. And when I got to the door, I opened it, and being English, I held the door open for the person behind me because he was right behind me. And he said, no, after you. And it went backwards and forwards like this. You know, they make comedy shows about things like this. So eventually he walked through the door, and then he said, it must have taken him some courage. He said, Mr. Jury, I have to explain something to you because what you did there was very embarrassing. He said, it is unforgivable for me to walk through the door in front of the boss.
Wow.
Unforgivable. And he said, but then I know that you don't know that, and you're being polite because you're English. So I know you weren't being insulting, but you were forcing me to insult you while walking through the door, and you need to know that so that you don't do it again. So, thank you. Yes. You need to understand the cultural things before you can deal with people well, because without it, you'll make someone walk through the door and cause great offence totally unknowingly.
So I have a question then. You're running these blast furnaces, so what's the more difficult thing, the technical side of running the blast furnace or the people side?
The most difficult day of my life was in the early 80s when they were laying lots of people off, and it was all done purely on seniority.
Yes.
And since there was reasonable turnover, we had about 20 people that had to be let go, and more senior people would come from somewhere else and take their place. So I didn't sleep very well that night. So there was a line of them outside the, and you do it one to one. Could have got them all in because you're telling them all the same story, but no. 3/4 of them said, look, we realise this is very difficult for you and it's not your fault. And so please don't feel bad about having to get rid of us.
So it wasn't personal.
Well, no, those sides of things are much more difficult than the technical side, that's always an interesting challenge.
Yeah, they're problems to solve, and you can solve them with logic.
You reach various conclusions, and then you do what it recommends.
But anyway, you've touched a little bit on a lot of characters you would have dealt with over the years, a lot of personalities, cultural differences, the whole bit.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll call it quits there, Jerry, and thank you very much for taking the time and talking to me. It's been fascinating. I hope that people will be able to check out some of the links associated with this and look for some further information. So thank you very much.
Okay, good.
As Craig just put it, we thank Jerry for sharing his time so generously, and we encourage you, the listener, to visit the links and show notes in your browser or podcast app to learn more about what you just heard. Stay tuned for further historical topics and updates, not only here on the podcast, but in our TV BlueScope YouTube channel and dedicated photo archive on Flickr. As always, thank you for listening to the Voices of BlueScope podcast, and catch you for the next episode.